Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. This practice is a gentle hatha practice for the low back. This is great whether you have low back issues or you want to strengthen your low back. Always listen to your body, listen to your breath, find variations as you need to. You might need a couple props for today's practice. You might need a blanket. I'm actually sitting on a blanket right now. 2 blocks and maybe a strap, a yoga strap. Gather your props and let's get going. So we'll begin in a comfortable seat, maybe sitting on a blanket so that your hips are a little bit higher. And we want to focus on a long spine. So just start to tune in to how your back feels right now. Try to avoid any rounding of the spine. So as I turn sideways here, and you don't have to sit cross-legged. You could sit with your legs out in front of you, flat on the mat, whatever feels good. So you want to have that tall spine, nice long spine. We want to avoid rounding like this. So if you're rounding, you might position a blanket under your hips, maybe even scooting towards the edge of the blanket. So your hips are higher than your knees, and that helps support the spine. Another nice option is to use a block to sit on. You could either sit on it just as you were the blanket, or you could come onto your knees and place the block in between your ankles. You could either sit directly on the block like this. That might be tight on some knees. Or you could put a blanket on top of the block and then sit on top of the blanket on the block. So this can feel really nice as far as getting a nice long spine, but some knees don't like this. So listen to your knees and find the position that works best for you. And just notice the position of your spine. And we're just going to do a few breaths here just to sort of tune into our bodies. I'm going to turn around now, find your position for a seat, and notice how your spine and back feel. You might even notice certain areas of the body that have tightness or tension. That's totally fine. Just notice what you're feeling in this moment. So observing how you feel right now. This is our initial assessment. And then if your eyes are closed, gently open your eyes. Come off of any props you might be sitting on. And we're going to come onto hands and knees first. Set your blanket aside unless you want a blanket under your knees. If your knees are sensitive, you might want to open up a blanket there. And then come into table pose, hands and knees. And just notice your spine here. Lengthen through your spine, gently draw your belly in. Take your tailbone towards the back of your mat and the crown of your head towards the front of your mat. Knees are about hip distance apart, wrists about shoulder distance, maybe a little wider. Press gently into your hands, almost like you're in a plank. Lengthen your neck so the crown of the head is reaching forward, the tailbone reaching back, gently drawing your belly in, encouraging space between each vertebrae. Notice how this feels. Take an inhale here. And then exhale, send your hips back towards your heels like a child's pose. So instead of relaxing completely into child's pose just yet, we're going to do a little movement called Chakravakrasana. Inhale, come back to table. Keep your hands where they are and knees where they are. Exhale, send your hips back only as far as they feel comfortable to you. Inhale, coming forward into table. Exhale, send your hips back, nice long spine. If you need to, you can lower the arms down and almost a full child's pose, but keep your neck long rather than letting your head drop. Inhale, coming back up, table. Exhale, slowly send your hips back towards your heels. You can either lower the forearms or keep the arms straight. A few more times. Inhale, coming up into table. Exhale, send your hips back towards your heels. Let's do a couple more. Inhale, table, long spine. Exhale, hips go back towards the heels. Lower the arms if you'd like. Let's do one more. Inhale, table, and exhale, hips go back. This time, just relax into your child's pose. So you might want a block to rest your head on, or you could use your hands to rest your head on if your head doesn't easily make it to the mat. If you feel like your head is being rammed into the mat, you might want to use a prop. And you might widen your knees slightly here if that feels easier. So breathe here in Balasana, child's pose. Soften your shoulders and arms. Make sure your head and neck feel comfortable. And notice your breath. This is a nice stretch into the low back. Notice your inhale. You might feel the belly against your thighs. And invite your exhale to encourage a softness and relaxation. Take one more breath here. Exhale completely. And then slowly on your next inhale, bring yourself back up. And just come to a seat for a moment and just pause. Just notice how you feel, just even with that one pose. And then we're going to move on to our backs. If you're on a hard surface, you might want to open up a blanket on your mat, just so that it's a little bit more comfortable, just sort of making it a little more cozy. You'll want to have a block handy, maybe a strap. We might get to the strap today, we might not. I might save that for another video. So have a block handy. Come on to your back in constructive rest. So knees are bent, feet about hip distance apart, heels a little bit away so it feels comfortable to you. So this is constructive rest. This is a great pose to just release the low back. So just pause here and invite your low back to relax. Invite your belly to relax and release. Notice any sensation deep into your belly. The psoas, the iliopsoas, those muscles can be very tight sometimes. So just encouraging all the digestive organs deep in the belly to relax. You might even notice sort of a sinking relaxation deep into the belly. And then we're going to move into some pelvic tilts. This can be really great for the low back. You'll want to sort of keep an idea of where you are now. So this is a neutral spine. And any space you might have right now between your low back and the mat or blanket that you're laying on, that's your neutral spine. So notice where you are now. Notice if you have a big curve in your low back, like you could almost fit your hand under your low back, or if there's hardly any space there, like you can barely get your hand under there. Notice what seems natural to you. So this is your neutral spine. And then as you exhale, draw your belly in. Think of taking your belly button towards the mat as you tip your tailbone up towards your knees and compress your low back into the mat or blanket. And then inhale, relax, creating that space again in your low back. Exhale, compress. You might even put your hands on your hips, thumbs top of your hip points, the bony protrusion right there at the front of your hips, and your fingers at your hip crease. So notice your pelvis tipping here. Inhale is neutral. Exhale, low back compresses to the mat. Notice how your thumbs went down and your fingers went up a little bit. Inhale back to center. So now your thumbs and fingers are more level. Exhale, compress the low back to the mat. Draw the belly in. Inhale, relax back to neutral. If you don't notice a tipping of the pelvis, you might want to overemphasize the arch in your low back, especially if your low back is more flat. So you might, on your inhale, try to arch the low back a little more and tip your tailbone down towards the mat. So again, inhale is neutral or maybe a little bit more of an arch in the low back. Exhale, compress your low back to the mat. Continue with your breath. Inhale, neutral or a little arch in the low back. Exhale, compress the low back to the mat. Draw your belly in. Move with your breath. You can go slowly or a little faster. Just go with the speed of your breath. Exhale, compress. Inhale, relax. Come back to that little arch in the low back. Few more. And then relax. Take your block. Lift your feet up off the mat. Bring your knees over your hips and place the block at the narrow setting in between your knees so that as you squeeze your knees are holding the block. I'm going to turn my knees a little bit so you can see that's how they're positioned. And then lower your feet back to the mat, keeping the block between your knees. Our inhale is going to be where we are now, where just enough effort is holding the block in place. And as you exhale, gently squeeze the block between your knees. So on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a level of effort, just a 2 or a 3. Arms by your side, maybe palms up. Inhale, relax. Exhale, squeeze the block. Inhale, relax. Exhale, squeeze the block. So you might notice your inner thighs, your adductors are working, but also notice your low back, the sacrum. Notice anything going on there. If you have any SI joint issues, you might feel something there. It might even realign any unevenness in the SI joint. You don't have to overdo anything here. Exhale, squeeze the block. Inhale, relax. Few more. Gently squeezing the block. And then relax. So now bring the block up, keeping it in between your knees up over your hips. Bend the knees a little bit more and point the toes towards the mat. We're going to start at the easier mode, and then you can make it more challenging as you need to. Gently squeezing the block, starting with your knees over the hips, arms by your side, either palms down or palms up. Engage your core, so strengthening the core helps to protect the low back. So we're going to do a little bit of core work here. Keep your core slightly engaged. Take an inhale, and you can point the toes. As you exhale, touch your toes to the mat. Inhale, bring the knees back up in line with your hips. Exhale, lower the toes to the mat. Inhale, bring the knees up. Exhale, lower the toes to the mat. So continue this way unless it's way too easy for you, and then you might make it more challenging by flexing the feet, putting your toes up to the sky, and touch your heels to the mat. Inhale, coming back up. Exhale, lower. Try to keep the same knee bend. If this is still too easy, bring your legs again to that 90-degree bend. And then you can either decide to point through the feet or flex the toes to the shins. So either touching the toes to the mat, bringing the knees back up, or flexing the feet, toes to the shins, and touch the heels to the mat. That's more challenging. And then come back, release the block, set it aside, and give your knees a nice little hug, drawing your knees towards your chest. And then holding your knees in each hand, keep your toes touching, and just draw your knees towards each armpit. Nice stretch into the low back. And then we're going to come into a twist. Thoughtfully lower your legs back to the mat. Have a block handy. So start by pressing into your feet. Lift your hips up a little bit and move them to the right of your mat. Then lift your knees up just about over your hips. Take your knees over to the left side of your mat and maybe place a block in between your knees. This helps stabilize the sacrum. And then arms by your side, you might gaze softly to your right and relax your back here. If this doesn't feel doable for you, you might find more support under the legs. You might position the block a little taller in between the knees, or find whatever variation feels best for you. Take a few breaths here. Notice how this feels in your spine. And then on your next inhale, remove any block between your knees. Bring your top leg up and then the other. Lower your feet, lift your hips, realign your spine. And then press into your feet again. Lift your hips up, move them over to the left edge of your mat. Lift your feet up off the mat. And then take your knees over to the right of your mat. Place a block in between your knees or whatever you did on the first side that works for you. Arms by your side, palms up, or whatever makes sense to you. Gaze softly to your left. Relax the upper back and shoulders. Relax your spine. This should feel pretty good. If anything doesn't feel right to you, adjust and find variations as you need to. Relax here. Take one more breath here. And then as you inhale, bring your head to neutral. Remove any block between your knees. Thoughtfully bring the front leg up and then the other. Lower your feet, press into your feet, lift the hips, realign your spine, set the block aside. Draw those knees back up towards each armpit. Give yourself a little stretch again into the low back. And then release the legs, come into a brief shavasana, arms by your side. Invite your whole body to relax and release. If you want to support your low back a little more, you might place a rolled blanket or a bolster under your lower legs. And just let your body relax and let go. Gently bring your awareness back to being on your mat. Notice your body, notice your breath, and observe your mind. Whenever you're ready, begin to make small movements, wiggle fingers, toes, whatever would delight you. When you're ready, bend one knee and then the other, and thoughtfully roll over to one side. Support your head with your bottom arm. Pause there. And when you feel ready, slowly press into your hands and arms and make your way back up to a comfortable seat, maybe keeping your eyes closed. Notice how you feel. Notice how you feel now compared to when you began the practice. And with appreciation for your focus and awareness, bring your hands together at your heart in Anjali Mudra. The light in me sees and honors the light in each of you. Namaste. Thank you so much for joining me today for this low back practice. I hope you enjoyed it and that you feel much better than when you started. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the mat. Thank you, everyone.